Okay, so we've established the new government, and this is on Alexander Hamilton's financial plan, how he was going to get the nation's debt paid off, how he was going to establish our credit, and how he was going to hopefully get our economy moving. I'll give you a little bit of background on this, what all was going on in 1789, 1790, 1791 when all this stuff was being talked about. Alexander Hamilton was the first Secretary of the Treasury. As Secretary of the Treasury, his job, what he was responsible for, was making sure that the nation's economic outlook was bright and that we had a growing economy and, more importantly, a stable economy. This is something we had not had under the Articles of Confederation, but we've already talked about that. So he's got kind of a big job ahead of him. When he became Secretary of the Treasury, he went through and did a survey and found that the debt that the government of the United States and then the various state governments owed was somewhere around $81 million by the time you added everything up. So this is a lot of money, as you can see right here in this chart. The amount of money that everybody basically owes, what our operating budget is, and how much revenue we're expecting to bring in every single year. This is an awful lot to pay off. So he's got a really big job ahead of him. He's also got the problem of nobody wants to loan money to the government. There's always one way to pay off your debt, and that's to get a loan, but the problem is then you have that debt you have to pay off. That's something else. A big, huge part of the reason why people aren't willing to loan us money is under the Articles of Confederation government, we hadn't been paying off our debts. So nations have a credit score just like people do. And so if we're not going to pay off our debts, we are not a good credit risk. No one is going to loan us money because the fear will be that they're not going to be paid back. And so he has to deal with all that. So question one here. What was Hamilton's dual purpose in proposing his financial plan? Alright, so Hamilton is a Federalist. If you remember back to the ratification debate of the Constitution, he was in favor of it. He wrote the majority of the Federalist Papers. So he wanted a strong central government. He wanted to help create a strong central government and make sure the nation's power was enough to not only govern the country, but also to maintain the economy. His primary goal in his financial plan was to establish the nation's credit. To put us in a position where we could borrow money more easily, where we could look at people and say, look, we need to borrow money, and they would be willing to loan it to us, not only because they had a sense of kind of maybe a patriotic duty, but also because they knew that it was a safe loan, that they would get their money back, that they would be paid back. So that's his primary goal, making sure that the nation's credit is established. However, his other goal is to use this as an opportunity to strengthen the power of the national government. And we'll talk about this here in just a second, what exactly that means, how he's going to strengthen the government's power. Alright, so question 2. What were the 5 parts of Hamilton's financial plan? And to be perfectly honest with you, depending on what you read, how it was written, how it's told to you, you might get this somewhere else as being maybe 4 parts, maybe a couple different parts, maybe only 3, whatever. It just depends on the organization. But I've got it here as 5. Okay, so all of his proposals. His first proposal, his first plan for doing all this was simply to fund the debt at par. What that means is that the United States government would pay off everything it owed. And that also included the interest. There is a way that you can get rid of your debt. It's very easy to do if you're a nation. You can look at people and say, we are not going to pay you the full value of whatever the debt is that we owe you. Instead, we're only going to pay you, let's go crazy, we're only going to pay you 10 cents on the dollar. So if you loaned the nation $100, you are only going to get back $10. That's an easy way for nations to get out of debt. That's an easy way for them to just, write everything off and be done with it. However, a couple of years later, when they need money, when they come to you and say, hey, can we borrow some more money from you? You should tell them no, because they have a history of not just not paying you back, giving you less than what you originally gave them. This would not be a case of, well, at least I got something out of it. This would be a case of, I lost 90% of what I had given them. So Hamilton says we're going to fund this debt at par. We're going to pay it off at face value. This is a very smart financial move. It helps establish our credit because, number one, we establish then a history of repayment. Look, it's safe to loan us money because we pay off our debts. Another reason it makes financial sense, and this is how he strengthens the power of the national government, is he makes people more willing to loan us money. Okay? So that history of repayment, people that have money will say, well, it's okay for me to loan money to the government because they do have a history of paying it off. And then when they loan that money to the government, then they have a vested interest in making sure that the government is successful. Because if the government is successful, they will pay me what they owe. If the government is not successful and we have to scrap the Constitution and create a new government might come in and say, okay, we're wiping out all the debt. There, we're starting off at zero. You get nothing. So this makes these people more invested in making sure that the government survives. The second part of his financial plan is usually referred to just as assumption, and I have it here as the assumption of the state debts. What this meant was the national government was going to take over the debts that the states owed. Okay? It's not a case of the states owe the money to the national government. Be careful how you write this line. This is a case of the states owe this money to private individuals, foreign countries, whatever. They'd acquired this debt before and during the Revolution, and Hamilton says, here's the deal. All you states that owe all this money, we are going to take on your debt. We are going to pay for it. You don't have to anymore. You will be fine. And the other part of this is that debt is also going to be funded at par. So all the debt, anything we owe, foreign countries, private individuals, anything the states owe, the national government, is going to pay for, and it's going to pay for it dollar for dollar exactly what is owed. This has the effect of strengthening the national government because now some of these states that maybe weren't on board fully with the idea of a stronger national government, maybe they were kind of hedged on whether or not they wanted to support the Constitution. Well, now Hamilton's saying, look, I'm going to take your debt. You owe nothing anymore. You can start over. And these states are going to be in a position where they're kind of thanking the national government. Thank you for exercising your power and using that to bail us out of this kind of financial mess we've gotten us in. In order to pay for a lot of this stuff, Hamilton says, well, we're going to have to raise some kind of taxes, obviously. This is how the government gets money. So he proposed a series of what are called revenue tariffs. Tariffs are taxes on imports. Revenue tariffs are designed basically just so the national government can get some kind of money off of this. Very usually small percentages that, everybody kind of understands you have to pay taxes. And so these are small percentages that, okay, yes, we'll pay that. We understand the national government has to tax imports. That's fine. He wanted a higher, what is called a protective tariff. A protective tariff is a tax on imports that is designed to be high. It's designed to be very high. A protective tariff, we'll talk later, its purpose is to make the cost of the imported good so expensive that instead we want to buy American. He wanted to do one of those. Congress was not really willing to give him one while Washington was in office, so we just kind of leave it at he wanted revenue tariffs, and that's it. He also proposed taxes called excise taxes. Excise taxes are taxes that are paid by the manufacturer of a product, whatever that product happens to be. It is usually paid on a per product basis, and I'll give you an example here in just a few minutes with what that was, with what Hamilton had proposed. So the manufacturer is paying it every time they produce a product. They are then paying this tax, and what ends up happening is the manufacturer wants to recover the cost, and so what they do is they just kind of add that into the cost of the product as they sell it to consumers. So it gets passed on to us as consumers. We don't really notice it because it's just rolled up there in the price. But whatever it is another form of tax that the government can use. To give you an idea of what all this was going to look like, how much money we owed people, this is what we owed foreign countries, this is what we owed people within the United States, this is what the national government owed people and institutions within the U.S. This is what the states owed, and here's how we're going to pay for it. Okay? The tariffs, the excise taxes, and then a couple other things. Hamilton said we can get some money off that. What's really interesting is this plan will work. Doesn't look like it will, but hey, it will. All right, so the third part of his plan, or the fifth part of his plan, excuse me, is the creation of a Bank of the United States. Okay. This was going to be a single, privately owned bank that the government would become a stockholder in. So the government is going to kind of partially own the bank. What this bank was going to do is it would hold the government's deposits. So the government will find a private bank. The government will make a contract with that private bank where the government will kind of be in charge. That bank will hold the government's deposits. You know, this is very similar to what you might have in a bank with your checking account. The government's going to put money in there, and then it's going to pay off its debts and pay to fund things out of that account, basically. Hamilton was hoping that by doing this, this would give one bank access to so much financing. All the government's money stored in one place. Banks are businesses, and what banks do with the money that we put in them is they turn around and they loan that out to people. Well, if you have people that want to start a manufacturing business, that takes a lot of money, and in 1791, there's not necessarily a lot of banks that have the kind of cash it would take to make a loan like that. This Bank of the United States would have that kind of cash and would be able to make that loan. And Hamilton hoped that that would stimulate business and industry and help the economy. This bank would also have the ability to print paper money, so we would have a standard currency in the United States. Because it is private and because it would enter into this partnership with the government, there would be a charter, there would be a contract that would exist for roughly 20 years. After 20 years, the government would have the opportunity to renew the contract or simply walk away. And ultimately, this whole thing that Hamilton came up with was modeled on the Bank of England. So they had something very, very similar in England. He was familiar with the way it operated, and so he said, this is a way to help create a stable economy, help prop up the national government, help stimulate business, and so we need to do this. Question number 3. Explain the controversy over Hamilton's assumption plan. This is the assumption of state debts. All right, well, there are several controversies that start, and so We will start with the assumption of state debts. You wouldn't think that this would be very controversial. We're going to help you out. Well, it turns out there were basically two problems with this. The first one came from southern states who had already kind of made plans and had started off, or in maybe some cases paid off, the debts that they already owed. Okay? So southern states, before now, they've sucked it up. They've done what it took in order to make sure that their debts were paid off, and now they start to gripe. This is Patrick Henry over here. He kind of leads the charge on behalf of the southern states, basically saying, look, this is not fair that we have raised taxes on our people, used our tax revenue to pay off our debt, and now you're proposing taking our taxes again and using it to pay off the debts of these northern states. And so they argued over this. Finally, a compromise was arranged. Thomas Jefferson actually helped arrange the compromise. And the compromise became that the southern states would agree to the assumption if the new capital were moved to the south. At this, when Washington is president, the nation's capital is going to be in New York. There were plans to move it to Philadelphia. Jefferson and Hamilton come to an agreement that they will instead move it somewhere in the south, and they're going to choose the site that will become Washington, D.C. And so the South would ultimately vote for the assumption. The second part of the assumption problem was how they're going to pay off the domestic debt. Okay? A lot of the states, the reason they have this debt is they had borrowed money from basically small farmers and individuals who didn't necessarily have a whole lot of money. During the Revolutionary War, some of them had kind of been paid in what can be described as IOUs. And so this money had been owed, and it's been owed for a long time. And what happened with these original holders is they sold their debts. They sold their IOUs to these people that are called speculators. A speculator is someone who buys something hoping that the value will go up and then they can sell it and make money. Well, what these speculators had done is they had had enough money that they went to these small farmers who had debts left over from the Revolution, who had money owed to them, let's put it like that. Had money owed to them from the Revolution, money owed to them from this period before the Constitution, and these speculators looked at them and said, basically, look, do you think you're ever going to get that money? Do you think this weak government will ever be able to pay you off? Right now you have zero. I'll give you, and they gave them, something like, 10 cents on the dollar. They owe you $100. I'll give you 10. That's money in your pocket right now. And these guys would sell it off. They would sell their bonds off at less than face value. And Hamilton says, we are going to pay the people who currently hold the debt, not the original debt holders. Thomas Jefferson was very opposed to this. Thomas Jefferson said this was unfair. The people that originally had that money owed to them, they are being taken advantage of. They are not getting what they deserve. That is completely unfair, especially since it was some of Hamilton's friends who, as he was making this proposal, they were going out buying up these debts, hoping to make some money off of it. Hamilton's counter-argument is, look, these speculators, regardless of who they are, they're taking a chance on the national government being successful. They have bought these bonds. If we don't pay them off, they're going to lose whatever they've bought them for. But if we agree to pay them off, they will know that this is going to be a stronger government, and they're going to want it to be successful because they're going to want to be paid. His other argument is, besides, those people that sold their IOUs, they do not believe that the country will work. They do not believe that the government will be successful. Therefore, we don't owe anything to them. They don't trust us. Question 4. What are the arguments for and against the establishment of the Bank of the United States? Well, we'll get to that in just a second because there is one other controversy to talk about in here. That's the whiskey tax. This is one of the excise taxes that Hamilton proposed. He says, everyone who makes a gallon of whiskey will be charged this little tax. The people that it's hitting most, of course, were the small farmers, especially those that were kind of out in the back country. We talk about this separately. Eventually, this will lead to the Whiskey Rebellion, which we talk about in class. So there was some controversy there. The Bank of the United States controversy helps shape the original political parties. Okay? Again, Jefferson and his followers, when Hamilton proposes the Bank of the United States, they are absolutely opposed to it. They say if you read the Constitution, nowhere in there does it say the national government has the power to create a bank, the power to establish a contract with a bank, power to do any of this. And so Jefferson really leads the charge against the Bank of the United States. Remember, he's a strict interpretation kind of guy. Hamilton, though, the loose interpretation, Hamilton says, look, this is a power of the national government. Okay? This is an implied power because it says under the necessary and proper clause that Congress shall have all the power necessary and proper, in this case, for regulating and maintaining the nation's economy. And he says, look, this is perfectly fine. We can totally do this. Jefferson and his people have another argument against the Bank of the United States. They're afraid of it. They fear that it will favor the manufacturers. They're afraid that it's only going to loan money to business interests, not to farmers. So they don't really see the bank as being something that's going to help out the ordinary people. They also are afraid that if you have one bank with all this money and it's getting it from the government and there's one group, one faction, one party within the government that supports it, that it might then turn around and use that money to influence elections. And so as the political parties form, the Federalists will of course always support the bank, the Democratic Republicans will not. What they were afraid of was that the bank would loan money to Federalists to use in their election campaigns, get them elected, and then the Federalists would, of course, continue to support the bank. Democratic Republicans would be at a disadvantage. And so those are that is a huge fear. They're afraid that the bank is going to be undemocratic. All right, so I hope after listening to this, you understand Hamilton's financial plan a little bit better. If you get a chance, get on YouTube. Look up the music, the soundtrack from the musical. You should do that too because it's just awesome. Have a great evening.